You hear me?
Yeah. How's it going?
Good. I'm just going to set you up as co-host right now.
Okay. And you are recording,
Yeah, I will record. Yeah,
just so you know.
going. So I want to welcome everybody to what has been a long, arduous, but productive time period in our lives. I think the fact that the lives that we've, according to the world we've been living in the last year, I would be remiss to say that we would have gotten here if we didn't have to. You're sort of forced to innovate. And one of the things that we've had for the longest time on our docket has been a number of different, assessments or surveys, for lack of a better word. And this was sitting in a sort of a paper version for quite a while. We said, look, this is something good here that we need to convert to an online and a technological way of people taking this survey. And so we came up with the Basadur inQ team survey, which is, as much as we all know, and everybody on this call is quite familiar with the profile, which measures our individual preferences when it comes to the innovation process. This is looking at, as a team, how do we perform? What behaviors and skills do I witness as a team that are related to the the stages that we're measuring with the profile? And so we've come up with this team, we call the innovation quotient, the inQ team survey. That's a bit of purely on the branding side, but we had said, what's the team? What does a team think of each other? What do we, how do we see each other when it comes to the innovation process? So I'm going to, let's see here. So a little bit of the purpose and the the reasoning behind this, and some of this is probably familiar with a lot of folks. Well, the reason behind the inQ is really to help teams. It's around team performance. We know that the scatter diagrams that people use indicate performance, but how do they really, what do other team members think about each other? We work as a team. So this is really geared towards teams that have worked together before. And the objectives are to help leaders, so team leaders, better measure innovation performance. This is something that I would say, it's always, if you were to ask somebody if a team is, are we really innovative? I mean, somebody might say yes. Somebody else might say, I think so, we're okay. But there's never really a way to kind of measure team performance. And the second piece is, we've always struggled to bridge sort of this gap between the profile. That was great. I love that profile. Sort of what do we do next? And we kind of envision the inQ as being a bit of a bridge, so to speak, to what's underneath the profile. What are we talking about when we're talking about problem finding? Oh, well, there's this step called, or generation, there's a step called problem finding. In fact, what does that mean? And, we know that if people get trained in the innovation process, they can improve their performance. So that's kind of the two, fundamental pillars to behind the inQ. Okay. So the whole idea about this being something that's measurable, as we all know, is that's been difficult to do. How do you measure how innovative you are? I mean, we all have stories of, somebody went to a Simplexity session, and out of that came these great ideas, and wow, we sold a ton more, we solved that problem. We don't often hear about that, at least we don't. And it's really difficult for us to kind of measure or tell people, hey, there's this company did this after they did a couple of sessions with their group and had these amazing results. We don't, it's hard for us to kind of relay that back to potential people as to, well, how does this process work? So the idea is that, we know that teams, especially now when the virtual world that so many people are living in, that innovative thinking is really hard. We know that problem solving is key as in team interactions, but a lot of team members, especially uninitiated to the profile, can't really put their fingers on why certain team members irk them, bother them, or really struggle to be innovative, because they kind of stop in their tracks. and they cancel each other out because they get frustrated. And the collaborative process ends up being kind of kiboshed, and people fail, or teams fail, and they're not exactly sure why. And so the inQ is, when you add that inQ to the profile, there's a much more introspective lens in terms of what's going on with the team. This slide, most of you have probably seen the idea of that the world is far more complex now. Today's focus is around multiple disciplines. We see that in many teams, not only multiple disciplines, multiple cultures, multiple time zones. Now that people are working much more virtually, their teams are not able to see each other. I don't know how many people I've talked to in the last 6 months where teams have been formed where they've never met each other physically, face to face, and are tasked with pretty serious project deadlines and projects to work on. So it's much more complicated in terms of what they're trying to do and the virtual world they're living on. In the old days, it was kind of much easier. Even in school, it's often when you're younger, here's the problem and give us the answer and you're good to go. It's teaching that type of problem solving was kind of the way things, and I would argue in some cases it's still done that way, but the world is becoming far more complex. And that's the whole idea behind this slide. So what we've got here is how do you analyze and improve a team's innovative performance? Everybody's familiar with the profile and the scatter diagrams, and the beauty of the profile and the scatter diagrams, especially the scatter diagrams, in an age, in an era where we probably read almost nothing. We like it, as quick hits. Our kids are on TikTok, and if it's over 2 minutes, we'll forget it. The beauty of the profile and the scatter diagram is almost instantly you get this, aha, I understand sort of what's going on here. Well, we take it a one step further with the innovation quotient. It's like, okay, I know how I rate myself as an individual on the profile. I kind of understand how this other person, now that I know his profile, but as a team, what do we do or not do together that, bogs things down? Is it exactly the same as what I'm seeing in my team scatter diagram, or are there some other dynamics at play here that maybe we need to talk about? And then if it looks like there were, based on the inQ, that, wow, we're not very good at problem finding or generation, well, what might I do? Where's some quick hit training that I might get that would allow people to say, when you want to get into maybe a generator mindset, here's some, quick hit training on problem finding. Here's some quick hit training on fact finding. What are we talking about? What are some of the things that to bring this more front and center in our mind? So we've kind of combined all three into kind of one offering. It's almost like this innovation kit that allows a team leader to not only to roll out the profile assessment, but now have an entirely new assessment for the team called the innovation quotient, and then to have some customized learning plans. And I'll show you kind of how this is all set up as we move forward, that you can address some of those shortcomings. And you as the team leader are in the driver's seat, because all this information, the scatter diagram, the results of the innovation quotient, the inQ, and the training are all under your control. So how you want to roll it out to your team members, your participants, is entirely up to you. But it allows you to really measure a lot of different areas when it comes to innovative performance. And it's kind of like a toolbox. So you have more tools in your box, and how you want to use that. Is it talent management? Is it putting a new team together? Is it to help better calibrate an existing team to work better together? That's entirely up to you. But these tools are there to give you some metrics that you can use to share back with the team members. Another thing, if people have questions, I forgot to mention this up the front, use the chat. Tim's kind of monitoring the chats. And if there's a question you have right in the middle of a slide, Tim and I said if it's really appropriate to that particular slide, then we'll address it at that time. Obviously, I'll leave some time at the end for questions, and gladly encourage any questions you have, and hopefully we can answer them. Profile measures preferences, as individuals, what part of the innovation process do we prefer? You've all seen these types of scatter diagrams. This one's relatively balanced, but in conceptualization and implementation, but only one optimizer. So, you know, obviously the dynamics of this team would be something that would be familiar to this group, but there'd be, you know, we're kind of short, even though it says 4 people in optimization. It's actually kind of just 1, maybe 2 with the one on the line. But you know what's happening there? We're all used to having that conversation, but this is a pretty well balanced team based on the percentages. The profile measures, as I said before, preferences. This is really key, and again, for most of you, this is probably, but the idea of preferences versus skills and behaviors is what we're trying to get at with the difference between the 2 assessments. The farther away you are from the origin, the more, you know, the stronger the style. People that are more towards the middle are more balanced. The scatter diagram, as I mentioned, really gives you a snapshot of the whole team, and it does, you know, provide a really good understanding of team behaviors really quickly. I mean, we see this and we immediately have an idea what's going on, which is what the power of the profile is. It's one thing to know your own individual style and, you know, hey, that's great, that's me. But when we can look at the whole team, it really gives some introspection into what's going on. And so often that it's very, very accurate when you have a debrief with the team members. So here we go. The inQ team. Hope everybody likes some of the new branding. We've worked hard at trying to do all our branding, and this inQ team is kind of how we've branded the Enqueue Survey. This is what measures the skills and behaviors that drive innovation, and they're all related to the stages, which are generation, conceptualization, optimization, and implementation. And the skills, as you all know, are divergence, convergence, deferral, judgment, and we have called it vertical deferral judgment. And somebody recently said, you know, it's called hopscotching the process. In other words, do we really follow a process, or do we kind of go from step 1 to step 8, or do we go from like step 2 to step 5? I mean, what are we doing here? So that's a new measurement and a skill that some teams either have or don't have, but we can measure that. The inQ, a little bit about the inQ from a scientific kind of, it's published research that the inQ measures team innovative performance and how well the team is executing the process stages with those 4 stages and the skills that I just mentioned. Well, so based on the results, where are the opportunities to, you know, where do we need to shift? We've been told that this is, you know, busy executives, busy people out there. Tell me, you know, what is this telling me? What does this tell me that you know, where are we short, or where can we perform better? And one of the things we address with that is that we've got all this great material. So we've created some e-learning modules, 8 of them, that kind of are targeted at each of the 4 stages and each of the 4 skills and how you can improve. And these are all built into the Enqueue Survey offering that we have on the through the profile site. Scientifically based, we know from the scientific evidence in the International Journal of Organizational Behavior and Human Performance, near and dear to Min and Tim, there is a 4-stage innovation process that works. This is the backbone of the inQ. The innovation process can be taught. 3 fundamental skills can be taught in each stage, which we all know as divergence, convergence, and deferral judgment. And the team rates their performance on each stage and skill. The inQ provides direction on improving performance. One thing for people to understand is at this point, we have made taking this survey an anonymous thing. So we don't want one person who might be considered the devil's advocate on every team there, every decision, that person, well, that person rated us a 2, so, you know, go figure. You know, that's what Tom always does. So no, we want this to be anonymous, and we want people to be able to be safe, knowing that they can basically pass on how they think about the team without being, you know, voted off the island, so to speak. That this is something that is anonymous, and that, you know, people aren't going to find out, you know, if they really hammer a team on being, you know, not innovative, that they're going to be singled out. So we were very diligent about doing that. A little bit on the mechanics behind the inQ survey, because I know every one of you have done work on the profile side. You've set up teams. When you set up a new team, at the bottom of the pop-up window, there's an area that's going to be that's just strictly related to the inQ. Right now it says assessment settings. By later today, it's going to say inQ assessment settings. So that'll be a little bit more obvious to you. There's two ways to do this. One way is to create one link. And the one link is that you've basically made it mandatory for everybody to take the profile in the inQ. We strongly recommend people doing the profile first and then the inQ, but you could have them do the profile, because everybody has to have a profile account to begin with. So if somebody is sent the link, what they're one link, they're going to fill out the profile and then immediately be taken in to fill the Enqueue survey. The other option is if you switch this off, you can have two links. So if you want to send somebody a link to do the profile and then a separate link to do the Enqueue survey, you can do that as well. As far as the messaging that you send to your participants, purely up to you. I know all of you have, however you do it. I would just continue, but the idea being that there's another survey if you want to send a separate link. I mean, you might send it a week later, who knows, or completely separate than the profile. So, but that's the way we've kind of set this up. 17. What is the 17 questions? Here's one that you can get a sense on. How often do people in your work team make premature judgments of new or fledgling thoughts? And the score basically goes from, if someone read always, that score would be a 1. And if somebody said, well, we never do that, the highest score you can get is a 7. So just so you have an idea, there's 17 questions. This is just one of the questions, but this is an idea. Each question is related to a particular stage of the process and a skill. So we've got 17 questions in total. So each one of these is kind of related back. And they are related to, again, related to their styles and related to the different skills. Here's a result, 22 people. Here's something that we found out that that's something that we've done a fair bit of beta testing over the last 3-4 months. And one of the outcomes that seems to be ever present is this dreaded score in the 60s, into the orange zone. Not too many teams we've had so far to go into the red zone, and very few have been in the green zone. But the range of responses is what's really interesting, because if some person rates this team with an 83, and somebody else rates it, say, a 30, in this particular instance, it's under 50, what's going on there? These are people that are, so this is a wide, so teams that have a very wide range, there's some underlying dynamics that are at play that you as the team leader or facilitator want to kind of start lifting under the hood what's going on. But what happens is, from a overall score, is that you typically are going to get scores in the 60s. That's what we're seeing right now. So I just wanted people to realize that. When I got an exam and I scored in the 60s, it didn't go over too well. But I'm passing. I'm not flunking, so it's not something that is earth-shattering. But there's definitely room for improvement. And to go from this group to go to 68 to over 90, we think that training is with some training and some work with a skilled facilitator or somebody running a debrief, you can really move the needle from 68 to into the 80s. And the beauty of the inQ is you can run the survey in January, and then you can run the same with the same group of people. You can run it in October and see if you've see if the results have changed. Same goes with the profile. If you want to use the profile with a same group of people to see if there's anything that's changed. Analyzing the results. So here, as I mentioned, here's the group, and this is on one side looking at stage performance, and you can see the scores 6.4, 7, 6.6 in optimization, and 7.4 in implementation. Well, if you were to look at this, there's a lot of gray area. Like some people are rating the optimization of the team in the under 3, and others are saying we're close to 9. So there's a big range there. Same goes with conceptualization. So, as a facilitator, you're kind of saying, what's happening here? Where there seems to be a lot of agreement around implementation. People are rated this almost from a 6 to a 9. So there seems to be some feeling that, that's kind of the way the team is. So the idea is not so much that yeah, we're not great in generation. We're not so good in optimization. We can improve in those areas ahead of the other areas, but what's going on, because the range is so great. Why is this? So this is a great tool to get that conversation. As you all know, with the profile, the whole idea of the profile, the aha moments are coming from the conversations when we kind of experience what it's like to be different in terms of our styles, and what that means and how that affects the team dynamics. Skill performance, same idea. Deferral of judgment with this team. Look at the range in deferral of judgment. Even though they scored a 7, somebody says, well, we're a 3, and somebody else says we're a 9. That's a big change. And I'd like to know. I guess it's almost like kids being born in this. They say no two kids are born in the same house. People on the same team, and there's lots of dynamics that are there. Tim just did one with a group, and he may share some of his findings using the inQ in terms of what the conversations centered around. So there's lots of dynamics that come into these ratings. But the idea is that now we're measuring some real life dynamics that are happening on these teams, and at the very least, it's a great conversation as to what's going on here. So based on this team, here's the overall skills, and you'll see on the bottom left it says, "Well, view the learning plan." So what we've created is that the scores on the left to go from 6.4 to 7.4, on the right converging as low as 6.5 to 7.6 for deferral judgment. So as a team leader, after you've sort of had your conversation and done your debrief, here's a how do we do how can we get better at this? What can we learn? Well, we've created essentially a learning module for each of these 8 areas. And the learning module essentially customized that it sends it ranks the areas in terms of the score. So, many people are busy. Do they really want to get into diverging or step 1 generation if they scored an 8? If our implementation was, even though it's the last sort of stage, do we want to give them that first if they score really low? And that's what we decided. But as a team leader, you're in control. This learning plan is essentially comes to you as a dedicated link that you can send to each person on the team to click on this link. It's connected to their profile account. They log in, and they are basically going to see something like this. And so this same group, generation, conceptualization, you can see on the left, it's kind of the order of the modules. Here's an explanation of what they're getting. And for this particular group, if you clicked on generation, there are the 2 steps that are highlighted: problem finding, fact finding. And that person, they click on generation. This is kind of the module. It's a 14 minutes and 46 seconds video that is solely focused on problem finding and fact finding. What does that mean? And how does that relate to generation? And hopefully by taking these or going through these modules, the people are going to have a little better idea, because the whole idea is, how do we speak a common language? Like when we talk about we're in generation, everybody on the team kind of knows that's where we are. We're not planning. We're not jumping to solutions here just because we're doing some problem definition. We're in problem definition. I get it. And this is sort of some of the tools and some of the language that we're going to be used in problem definition. And I'm in. Like I'm going to shift over there to problem definition, and we're going to start working on problem definition. I know exactly what we're talking about. We'll probably do some how might we's, and so we all speak the same language. And ideally, we're going to work better together. We're going to solve problems better together and be more innovative together, because we all speak the same language. And I'll let Tim talk to this. This is a little bit what we've seen so far. We've done about a half dozen with real live groups. Tim, you can maybe speak to this group. This group was I'll say the client. It was a team from Microsoft, a project development team in a new area, and Tim can speak to the debrief. I think he had about a 2 or 3 hour debrief with the group, but more specifically, around the conversation that was had around the inQ. So Tim, do you want to just elaborate a little bit on what happened there?
Yeah, sure. So this, just to give you a little bit of context, the team I was working with, there were 28 of them. They were just over a year ago, before the pandemic started. They were in 7 of them were on the team only, and they were in a Microsoft incubator. And when so basically they were trying to figure out what their idea was. You know, they were in very much generating and conceptualizing, figuring out what it might be. The pandemic hit, things shut down, and senior leadership at Microsoft said, this needs to happen as quickly as possible. So all of a sudden the team went from 7 up to 20. And then they've got 8 more people who they've been working, more of the computer engineers joining the team more recently. So they've been building up very quickly, and their shift has gone from conceptualizing and generating to optimizing and implementing. And so of the 28 people, only 7 of them had met in person, right? So they're very much a new team under a lot of pressure. It's a huge opportunity. It's kind of like being on the iPhone team back in Apple in the mid 2000s, and so it's kind of, you know, they're looking at it as maybe a career making team. So they're highly committed, but it's a lot of pressure. What's great about this slide is how you have the profile scatter diagram with the inQ results. So we could jump back and forth. And so, you know, we had, I put a lot of attention on the optimization. When you look at the team stage performance, the middle, the middle image there, you can see there's a huge range in scores. And then you look, so I was able to take them over to the profile and say, you know, why might this be? Why might we have this range? And it was, you know, it was a tough conversation to start with. They needed to sort of drink it in a little bit, understand it, and then try to figure it out, you know. And so they talked about the fact that the maybe there were people at different stages of the project, you know. So while they're a team, they're a big team, and maybe there were sub teams, and so some of the sub teams were in more generator mode, and some were more in optimizer mode, and that's why they scored differently, and or looked at it differently, and said, well, that might be, but at the same time, you should be doing a good job of these every step along the way, you know. So whether you're at the beginning of it and you're working on problems, you're going through it as a team, you should be optimizing well, you know. You should be, no matter where you are, you should be executing the stage as well. So, but just looking at it as an overall, you know, would it surprise you that when we have so few optimizers that there's broad dispersion in terms of how you guys feel you're doing on it? And where I didn't push too hard, in part because it was a team building exercise, and I wanted them to leave feeling really good about themselves as a team, right? So I didn't want to go in and say, so tell you optimizers, you four scatter points here, you talk, explain, right? You know, what do you think? I did ask them. I said, you know, from an optimizer, if you are an optimizer, if you're one of these 4, you know, how was the experience for you? And I said, you know, but so it ended up with a very good conversation, and they walked away from this part of it saying, you know, they already understood that they needed to pay more attention to optimization, but the inQ, what it really came into them with was an awareness that it bothers some people, that it isn't that they kind of don't do a good enough job of it. So there are people that aren't happy with it, and it also came in that there are people who are too happy with how they're doing about optimization. And so it's kind of like, you know, their take was, we've got to get serious about this and be better, right? And get more on the same page. So they were talking about having some, you know, sort of when they get together, when they were getting together after the session, and going through it again and talking about what they might do, they had some ideas, right? And they were going to talk about them some more. They were also going to they were going to go through the training modules that were there. And so it's when my experience so far is when I'm using the inQ in my work with teams, that I have to explain the skills very well. So in terms of variation, you know, so hey, a high performing team in terms of divergence, you would see more of this. A lesser performing team in terms of divergence, you would see this kind of behavior. I actually, when I'm doing the divergence, I do, when I talk about the skills, I put them through, you know, a divergent thinking exercise. I tell them to come up with as many, you know, how might the team be better at coming up with breakthrough ideas, you know, something like that. And then as they start talking, I of course kill them all. You know, I use the killer phrases, and I use that to sort of bring in the idea of the three primary skills. I talk about the hopscotching, or the vertical deferral of judgment, in terms of you know, teams' tendencies to go from got an idea into implementing it, or if they're a conceptualizer happy team or dominant team, that they stay in conceptualization and are uncomfortable moving forward out of it towards implementation. And say, you know, and then with them sort of then prompting them to respond. You know, so how is it with your team? What has your experience been? Do you see these things much? You know, if this is how I've described one team, how might you describe your team? And you know, and that's where I say, you know, deferral of judgment is in play here, and as is divergence. We're not judging. We're surfacing information, all possible angles, so that we can better understand. So it's a way for me actually to introduce them to the idea of skill and training. I make them where it's like, this is you know, this is how you do it. This is, you know, if you really want to be good at divergent thinking, and you really want to be skilled, you have to be good at withholding judgment. So that's I don't want to go on too much longer, but so I start off by picking either areas of where there's more agreement. So for example, skill in the skill performance, diverging has a low range. So there's more, you know, there's less variation in terms of evaluations by team members. So I say, so you guys seem to be fairly strong here, you know, or more in agreement. So what's happening? Explain, you know, sort of let's talk a little bit about that. And then I move into where there's broader disagreement. Or sometimes I will start off with the big, you know, the elephant in the room. It's like, look at the range here. This is too big to ignore. So we're going to start with it. And so for me, you know, that's I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. And
we'll move on. I got some, you know, you sort of talk, you know, you talked about something, you know, facilitating an inQ debrief, you know. Again, as Tim mentioned, it's all about an open dialogue. I think in the last example, Microsoft, well, that team had 60% implementers and rated themselves not that high in implementation, which might be completely different than what you might do in a profile debrief. That obviously, you know, you guys are too strong on implementation. This adds another layer in terms of what's really going on, and to have a conversation. You know, that's as Tim said, what are the widest ranges? What do you guys think that means? Why do some people feel like they're performing much better or worse than others? So those types of, you know, these types of questions are, you know, the types of questions that you want to ask when you're starting to use this with teams that you're working with. You know, you guys, everybody's familiar with this one, which is you know, what are we saying that or doing that will help us innovate as a team? What are we saying or doing that hinders us to innovate as a team? These are sort of standard complexity debriefing questions that we would have after every session. We'll start, you know, these are great questions to ask. when you're doing a debrief on the NQ. You know, this is great, you know, sort of, you know, light, you know, gas on the fire in terms of really getting a good discussion, because that's where you start getting what's really going on when people feel free to kind of express their views and talk about these kinds of things. Okay, we'll get to questions. I know there's, I think on the chat I saw one question come through from David, but we'll address all these when I'll just get through these next few slides. Right now, everybody gets free access to the inQ. This includes anybody who's got an enterprise account, and any new enterprise accounts that are purchased or renewed prior to the June 30th will get the inQ for free for the balance of the. So if you bought this on June 29th, it's yours to use till June 29th, 2022. We want people to use this. We want people to report back to us what's working, what's not working, what could be better. Wow, I found this out. Wow, if we had this would be great. All that kind of, because we want to continually make this better. Right now, the pricing that we envisage is $5 per NQ. So if somebody buys 20, here's an example scenario. If somebody bought 50 slots with the profile and wants to bundle the NQ, the price would be 25 plus 5 is, that should say $30. I guess my math isn't very good. And $1,500. Not sure how I missed that one, but that's the idea. And this includes all the e-learning modules. There's no extra charge for that. We are going to be offering like a certification course. It's probably more, half of it's going to be related to the actual, you know, the questions, the specifics, what we're measuring, but a good part of it's going to be on how to run a debrief. How do you, ideally we see, I mean, almost all of you are running debriefs with the profile, and we see this as another debrief, like a maybe completely separate opportunity and completely separate assessment to have a completely different conversation, you know, to move the needle. You as a facilitator or team leader or coach or consultant, whatever your role is with your team, to have another tool in your toolbox to, you know, push the needle and get these teams to be even more innovative and better problem solvers. That's the whole idea behind it. Now, do you need to buy it? So going forward, an enterprise unlimited subscription for a corporation, which was $4,000 before, would now cost $5,500 for corporations, $3,000 for unlimited for academic, nonprofit, and, you know, those ambassadors, our ambassadors. And again, this includes all the e-learning modules and the team builder kit. We will have pay-as-you-go pricing, as always, so they can be purchased separately. You don't have to purchase the inQ if you don't want. You can still continue buying profiles like you always have. But rather than just to be able to buy the inQ, you know, so many inQ surveys and so many profiles, we think the two really are go hand in hand. So if you have a team of 10 people that are going to take the profile, we highly recommend you would send the inQ survey to the same 10 people. So bundling it together just seemed to be the best way to do it. And we're not, you know, we want to make it reasonable, and we think it's a, you know, it's a great opportunity for you as a coach to have another, you know, have another session. I think people, especially in today's remote learning world, you know, environment, to have something that's interactive and fun and something that you could lead for there's a lot of people out there looking for some good content, some really good interactivity when you're running a Zoom session. And we think both these assessments, the profile and the inQ, offer that. The feedback we've had so far has been, you know, it's always been great with the profile, but it's been really good with the inQ as well. Additional products and courses coming up, I wanted to, you know, highlight, because this is kind of taking it kind of through the inQ, and it's going to be available after this. Everybody will have it in their accounts. It'll be available to you to use. We will be having an Enqueue certification course. We're actually building a team effectiveness e-learning course, which is essentially, if any of you or all of you have the team builder kit, where you realize that there's a slide deck to use in a debrief for the profile. There is a instructor's guide which kind of explains. So if you haven't been technically certified in the profile. We give you some information in terms of what the profile is and how to answer sort of basic questions. We also have a, how do you analyze a scatter diagram white paper that's available. But we're going to be adding a fourth kind of, you want to call it a download. It's going to be a course that essentially is divided into 4 modules. The 4 modules are the complexity framework as a whole, the innovative results equation. There's going to be a module purely on the profile. There's going to be a module purely on the inQ, and then there's going to be a module in terms of how do you do an analysis? How do you look at a scatter diagram? How do you look at an inQ? And how do you debrief that? So if someone never came to training and wanted to use the profile and use the inQ inside their organization, we would highly, highly recommend that they have the team builder kit, which would contain all those files. Another area that we're adding, if anybody's created a team over the last 3 to 4 months, is we're now asking you to tell us what kind of team that you are creating. So we're trying to build out a database of team type data. And we're constantly being asked, what do you have what are other law firms like? What are other sales teams look like? What are other software development teams look like? So we're trying to collect some data and play that back in terms of, so you can start looking across function. How do we compare to other entrepreneurship schools, or how do we compare to other business faculties? How do we compare to entrepreneurs, engineering schools and that kind of stuff. So we're trying to play a lot of this back, and we think there's a real richness in the data that's being collected that people can use, especially if you're working with a client and you're, say, in a consulting coaching role. It's a great way to have this information. And lastly, some of you we've basically created what we're calling right now the How Might We app. It's technically, I guess it's virtual collaboration software. It's really a challenge mapping app. We've used Mural, we've used Concept Board, probably everybody's used PowerPoint. We realize what works, what doesn't work, where the limitations are, and trying to jerry-rig Mural to do everything, even drawing the arrows between one card to the next card, or even doing the dotting, voting for lack of, we've created an app. We've done a lot of testing. I've worked with a number of clients on it myself who loved it. And this is like ready to go. We're doing some different demonstrations on that. We'll probably invite people to actually do a real live challenge mapping session where everybody who is invited as a participant can participate as a participant and see how we've created some facilitator tools. The idea is that it's going to start at $25 a month per facilitator, $15 a month for academics, nonprofits, ambassadors. There's going to be a co-facilitator role. So you can actually start doing challenge mapping, and it's going to be integrated into your profile account. So if somebody has a profile account that, say, it's enterprise, it's unlimited, and you have 10 facilitators in your company that do challenge mapping, you will be able to have 10 facilitator licenses. So each of those people can be facilitators inside the company. If you're a coach or a consultant and you have a client that you're working with, you could set them up as to have their own facilitator licenses, and you can be a co-facilitator. So we're doing a lot of coaching and mentoring where we have a client that we've trained to do challenge mapping, and the challenge that they have is that, yeah, they've learned a challenge map, but do I really want to go out and do one? Well, if I'm there to help you, and I'm there to help you, do the challenge mapping, you're going to do it. And so if people, people that attend training, a great jumping off point, knowing that you're kind of going to sort of paratrain them and hold their hands and make it work for them, gives them all the more reason to make it happen and then get good at it. And the beauty of the virtual, collaboration software is that you can, if it's an hour that they need you to hop on a Zoom session to help them work the board, you can do it, and you can do it from your your home office or your office inside your business. So we're excited about that. We've done a lot of beta testing and we'll obviously always try to keep this improved. So stay tuned for that. It's coming within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And we'll do a separate Zoom session on that. So that's all I have kind of for now. I think we have some, time for some questions, and I'm going to just go to the chat here. Yeah, so David, this looks more like something for a team that is established, share some reasonable time together. Definitely can be, it's definitely geared towards that, David. Intact teams are, yeah, it's much more suited to an intact team than it is a new team. But I think, in a project-based environment, especially in a university or setting where you're putting people on the teams, especially projects, to actually have them fill this out when they finish as part of a mandatory requirement would be very interesting. And to have a year-end debrief around that, I think it would be interesting to see, based on the projects that are submitted and the scores on the inQ survey, what the correlation is there. Are teams that rate themselves really highly in the inQ, do they correlate to the people getting better marks in their projects? I think that's something that we would love to get some research around, and we would be more than happy to have a conversation offline to how we might do that, because this is huge. There's lots of great research opportunities with these assessments.
Nosh had a question around, or has a question around, how can we minimize or mitigate any participant bias when they are completing the inQ? Nosh, I'm wondering if maybe you can't just elaborate on that question a little bit before we respond.
Yeah, I think just some additional piece of context, working with different types of teams, you always have one or two kind of troublemakers in the team, right? And they basically have their own vested interest. And I was just wondering if they just spoil the overall results, and especially if it's confidential. So as far as the executive sponsor is concerned, if you have to give them some analysis of what these results mean, it might get skewed because of one or two biased people and their responses. That was just my thought.
Well, I guess on one level, I'm always concerned when we don't want to prejudge that someone's those people that we're talking about may be good-hearted people who are frustrated, and this might be the chance for them to surface some of the reason that they're unhappy. Sure. Like this might be an insight into why you have some outliers. What is potentially an issue is maybe someone feels, and I think this is true on either end of the variation. So someone who scores it really highly or someone who scores it very low, they may feel some social pressure to not reveal themselves, because they realize they're out of step with the group, right? I scored at a 9, and overall everyone said a 7. So apparently I have rose-colored glasses on. Or I scored at a 3 when everyone else scored at a 7. Geez, maybe I'm too harsh, and I don't want to stand out as a guy who says we're bad, right? That could be an issue. I mean, we are, this is new, and we're learning as we go. And so there are a number of biases that might come into play. The important thing is to, and I'm not saying this doesn't come with challenge. It is a challenge, but the skillful debrief of this can get them to share, right? To start talking. So I don't want to ignore that someone said we're a 2. I want to say, well, why might someone say that this is a 2? Or I may not go that specific and say, look, someone gave it a 2. But look, there's a huge variation here. Why might that be? Why might someone who scored it low have in fact done so? And this is, and it's like, so I'm asking, it's like, this is where rather than be defensive and say, well, that's because they're just bad apples or they're just unhappy, is to say, no, be creative here. This is your, this is important to you that you filled out a couple of instruments around creativity and innovation. So let's do that. Let's see some of the skill. Let's let's put ourselves in that person's shoes and say, why might someone do this? Why might someone feel that we could be better at this? And then you turn around on the other end, right? So why might someone say we're great? And what is it that you're doing that might lead this way? And you can surface maybe some behaviors that come out that are happening. And that way, if you do have some of those people who are, they just aren't happy for whatever, that's just who they are. I'm sick of this and I want out, people will highlight some of their behaviors, right? Well, why do we have it? Well, because we got some people who as soon as one person says something, they counter it, they deliberately, they deliberately use killer, whatever it might be. So it's a chance to get into skill. It's a chance to get into actual behaviors. And so that's certainly there. But you do raise another interesting opportunity for us with this, and that may be to measure degree of concordance. And concordance is, the level of agreement amongst those people who are doing the rating. And so, if you average them out, you can say, oh, well, here we are, we're at a 7, but you could look and see, we could look at the data and maybe try to pull out, is there one person who scored it low and everyone else scored it high or what have you, right? So that's something that we would come down to later. Certainly, like, we don't have it ready to roll just yet, but it's an interesting thing. I've also had some people say that they scored the central tendency bias. I don't give anything 5 out of 5. Or if it's out of 7, I don't give anything a 7, but at the same time, I don't give anything a 1 either. Well, great. That means we're now our range is reduced. So Bob mentioned earlier that we don't see a lot of teams that are in the red or in the green. It's like, well, maybe part of that is because no one wants to say they're perfect and no one wants to say they're weak. And so we're automatically constrained to the middle areas of the rankings.
No, excellent. Thanks for that, Tim. I think the more I do it, I think the better, more comfortable I'll feel. But where I definitely concur with you is that I think it's going to open up to some powerful questions and some deep insights for the client. But it definitely does need very skillful facilitation. I'll say that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you can get good richness out of it without being very skillful. But you can get if it's a challenging situation, it's like anything, right? If it's a challenging situation, the better you are at it, the better job you do, the better the results are. And so it's also, this is a new instrument for us, and we don't have the 30-year history with it that we do with the profile. So we're uncovering new things as we go. And so that, and that's part of it. And that also actually is part with the skillful debrief of it is to be open in the discussion of it to say, well, so what else might there be? And it's a learning opportunity for you, debriefing it a little bit as you are doing with everyone else. So you're hearing these things, it might be new to you, and to be able to say, to facilitate that conversation, where you feed it back to them and ask them to explain, to ask them to dig into it more than telling them necessarily. Nabil, do you have I see you have raised your hand.
Yeah. I have actually 2 questions, but I start with one. You mentioned on the Microsoft example that they had then some sub teams, and you were wondering if it is sub teams. In my case, when we have at different universities, we teach project-based, problem solving with real clients. So we have a class, and then usually the class is divided in subgroups. So I was wondering if there are any thoughts about allowing to aggregate the performance. Like, you want to measure in each smaller sub-team, but then you want to aggregate the whole and see, for example, what the cohort is doing or what this full team is doing. Is there any facilities to do that?
I don't think we have designed that yet. But what you may be able to do with that is, you could give each sub team their own link, right? They take, so you could know them, by sub team, and then put that all together as well, and then aggregate that way. So I think it could be possible, but it's a little bit more work right now on the front end.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we could probably just aggregate the responses, just go backwards, as opposed to if you were to send a link out to the entire class, and then you were to take the that aggregated data and go to, turn them into find out 5 people on this team, you take their answers and put them together. It's just going backwards. I think it would just be the data is all there, and rather than chop it into sub teams, you're going from sub teams to an aggregate. And so it's still, heck, if the aggregate is 60 people, and then taking the, say, 5 teams of 12 people and just go the other way with it. So we could probably look at, that's probably just a technical thing that we could work on for sure. Those are the things that we want to, as we build this out. When we first built this, we had no idea that the range of responses was going to be something that is pretty critical to the debrief. It wasn't something on our radar screen. So it came about from a couple people using it with some teams. Oh, didn't realize that. So, these are the things that as people roll it out and use it and say, wow, it would be nice if we did this, or the groups asked me this question, that's when we add the functionality.
So my second question is actually a different area. The innovation process. I remember, in the early days, you had an innovation process that was 3-part.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was to 4 parts, and I always thought that this was quite useful to show the different, the 4 types of, from the profile, that they needed each other, and then you went to the 4 process, which seems to be, for each one of the categories of the profile. Can you share some of the thinking why you did that? Because I always thought the 3-1 was more linking, more integrating in a team.
Yeah. Well, I'll start off, I guess. It was just simplifying things to enable better understanding. I mean, I go back to the days when we talked about it in like 2 halves, and then there were the 3 phases, right? Which, if you guys, I won't make it a quiz here, right? But I won't say, okay, who remembers? But the 3 phases, right? Problem finding, solution implementation. And then we would lead into the 4 stages, and then the 8 steps. And the kind of feedback we got and the experience of it was that it got to be confusing, especially with a graphic where you had 4 different stages and then 3 floating titles around it. It became less effective in terms of what we're really trying to get them to understand. So the 3 phases are great. I will still talk about, I still use it. It's like, listen, you're finding good problems, you're solving good problems, you're getting those solutions implemented. Boom, it's right, it hits. It makes sense. But I am now, now I've gotten used to also saying, listen, you've got to generate those new opportunities. I call them POPs. Problems, opportunities, possibilities, and then you've got to make sense of them. And so what are we really after, and what are we going to do, and then how are we going to go about it? Really, like, plan it out, and then doing everything we have to do to make sure it happens, right? So that is how I've shifted. But so overall, it's just like, really what we want them to do, we kind of looked at is the overall focus is the 4 stages, and then to talk about the 2 steps in each stage. And so, and how can we do that more neatly? And so we moved away from talking about the 3 phases and just jumping into the 4 stages and 8 steps.
Yeah, you may want to consider about the divergence conversion thing. I found it really useful to whenever you get the divergence, before you jump into conversions, to negotiate actually the terms of selection, the criteria of selection, because otherwise people start eliminating and getting back to the old ways.
Yeah.
So in any of those phases, it might be useful to add that little step, say like, don't forget to negotiate among the team the selection criteria.
Yeah, I agree, and that's where when I talk about debriefing the skills and that you have to. For a lot of people, this is new, right? It's not new to us to talk about. We know what divergence is, convergence, deferral of judgment, but they're not really sure, or as sure, and so to have that's why I bring in the exercise, and as part of that, I have the graphic of the skills with the description of them, but I want them to have that experience so it's more visceral and more impactful. Not only do they understand it, but they felt it, and and then you talk about how familiar that is and how it doesn't help, and so when we're so it ends up being a good exercise back and forth. But yeah, it is something. It's like when you're going in and picking, I mean, when you go through our training, there are slides or if we're facilitating, I'll put up a slide that says, if you're picking ideas, right, you want to look for impact on the how might we. You want to look for the ones that are concrete. You want to look for the ones that next step is obvious, easy to understand, all those sorts of things. Those are guidelines to picking. But we also have, slides for when you are converging, right? That you're doing it objectively. You're not looking for what's yours. You're looking, and that you're to stay open-minded. And that's why and then we bring in the telescoping. But that's hard to do when we're just debriefing the inQ. But you do have to have some coverage of that. I mean, I'm not anywhere near going to teach or introduce telescoping when I'm going through the skills. That's a different thing entirely. But I am going to go through, like, to what extent are you guys open-mindedly listening to hear ahas? I'll ask, when you guys do work together and you're converging, how many of you use votes? Do you vote? Which one got the most votes? So what's wrong? What's good about that? What's wrong about it? And that's where, if you're doing that, you're not being open to hearing what the lone genius in the corner, or the guy up in the boat in the crow's nest who sees further than you, or differently than you, from a different vantage point than you, but sees something important. And so that's where, again, there's a lot of richness to this and room for variability in terms of how we do it. That depends on maybe on the team, maybe on the situation.
Thank you.
So, no problem.
Well,
anyone else?
Well, I've recorded this, and
Tim, maybe I just make one other comment. It's Larry speaking.
Larry, we can barely hear you.
Second, there. Is that
there you
better?
go.
Okay. Yeah, just to build on a point that Tim made. I mean, obviously the debrief is critical, and the survey really is a springboard for that debrief. But just as important, in my opinion, is when you engage the team like that, the key is that team makes some decisions about what they're going to do about it. So they've had a discussion, learning has happened, they've understood some of the perhaps flat spots associated with the team, opportunities. The fact that you have engaged them and they're involved in that discussion leads you to defining some actions that could be taken. Because as Bob pointed out at the beginning, the inQ is all about improving performance. And the The survey is simply the first step in that conversation. The debrief is the second, but perhaps most critically, all right, you want that team to be committed to say, listen, we are going to make that change. So if they said, listen, we're going to take some of the training, that was their decision because they saw value in developing some skills and improving their capability with respect to that. So that's that 3-step process that you're really looking at, which really drives the performance.
Thanks, Larry. Well, we've gone kind of past the hour here, and so I'm going to record this. I'll send everybody a link afterwards. If you have anybody that we had a few people that said they couldn't make it, and would I be recording it? So, but if there's anybody you think that would be interested, please pass the link on, and really thank everybody for joining us. Great to see a number of you. We haven't, for those we haven't talked to, or good to see everybody's doing well. And please reach out to, especially myself and Tim. If you've got some any insights, you've got a client that you want to work with even directly, you may want to, work with us on how to set this up. My email you all have, and just reach out. Be happy to help. And I thank everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks,
Okay.
Tim.
Thanks,
care.
everybody.
Okay, guys.